Hello, Universal People! Welcome to the People's Basics, where we discuss universal basic services and how we bring them to the people. Join me today as we talk to Kirby Birgans Taylor about his experience as a public school educator, inequality in our school systems, running for Congress in Illinois' 1st Congressional District, and what teachers and students are needing from their local governments. Hello, Kirby. Welcome to the People's Basics. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Hello, how everybody's doing today, and thank you for having me on today.
Oh, you're very welcome, Kirby. So, as we alluded in our intro, you are running for Congress in Illinois' 1st District after being a public educator. Can you take me through some of the inspirations that drove you to want to run for office compared to your previous line of service?
Sure. Well, first, I want to say by starting off by saying that I was born, raised, and educated in Illinois' 1st Congressional District. I am an alum of Chicago State University, and although I know all too well that life isn't fair, I do believe that our government should be. I believe that our government should not just provide a quality education, but equal access to resources that our scholars will need to succeed. And, as a science teacher, you get to understand those progressive policy changes that dismantle inequities, ensure that all children are able to compete in a competitive global economy. And so when I look back over my life as a Chicago public school student, someone who understands that life isn't fair, but that our government should be. And when I look back over our education system and how we are leaving far more kids behind than we think we are, that is bring about a change. And so as a teacher, you get to see those inequities in the community. I have students, parents that are working 2 jobs. So what do they leave them to parent their kid? I have parents that are single moms that the father or mom may be in jail. And so we have to look at those things too. What type of trauma is being brought onto those kids? And so we're looking at this system and seeing all of these inequities. Someone has to be a disruptor for change. And so that's what brought me about this fight. And so I am more eager, more now than ever, when it comes down to bringing equity inside of our education system and bringing equity inside of Illinois' 1st Congressional District.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that front of fairness is one of the striving goals of our society, and there is a lot of inequality within the system. I'd love to ask you some of that kind of experience that you kind of grew up with. When I was reading through your website, you certainly had a working class background experience, and I wanted to understand kind of the support systems that we kind of expect out of our community in general. Is there anything that you kind of lead to that kind of led you to get to this point where you are today? Because if you go to Kirby's website, he went through quite the journey to get to this point. What were some of those needed support services that you thought made things a little bit more fair for you growing up?
Well, so a little bit about my upbringing. Both of my parents suffered from substance abuse. So I landed in foster care, being raised by my grandmother, who was a nurse. And so she also was a business owner. So she owned the laundromat in the heart of the community. And so what she did with that laundromat was not just, wash people clothes, but she used that as a hub of resources for the community. And so me seeing that and me actually helping with those things because, grandma, when she called and say, hey, she need this done, you got to do it. And so when you see those things, and she used to always say to me, Kirby, life haven't been fair for everyone. And so you do your part in making life better for everyone, whatever you can do. And so if it was just her washing coats of my friends who she felt was, they winter coats was dirty, she would do it. If it was turning her basement or the fun room into, a place of living for someone that was out of their home, she would do it. If it was raising money or a food can drive around Thanksgiving for churches, she would do it. And so when you brought up in that type of atmosphere, it brings about a change that you cannot, escape. I was always taught train a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not depart from it. So those things that she trained me on, I didn't depart from them. I had also within my own self, fighting for $15 an hour, when I was working in retail, almost losing my job because of that. Also, we had a governor here who was a Republican, and he was a union busing governor. And so one of the things that he wanted to do is to bust the unions. And one way he was going to do it is defund some of the things my school, Chicago State, we lost a lot of funding because of that. And so what we did was we protested. And so I locked arms with my fellow classmates on one of the most busiest highways in Chicago, bringing a cry out to our community, letting them know what our government was doing. Even when Trump was in office, I went to the airports, when he was saying that immigrants are not welcome here. I saw that they are the bedrock of this of our working force. Some of the jobs that they do, we don't do, so we need them. I believe in the words on the Statue of Liberty: "Bring us your tired and your poor." And so, because of that, I was out there protesting. And even in 2017 at the Women's March, I was out there with women's and men as well, saying that women's rights are human rights. And so because of my upbringing, though, that brought about my community activism.
So, Kirby, I'd love to ask you, on a variety of those fronts, it is essentially community organizing, whether it's through mutual aid, whether through labor organizing, through protest. I'd love to ask you, in your opinion, what is needed to support those who are the supporters of these causes? What is needed as support for these community organizers that the federal government or the local and state governments can do to help improve the lives of those who are organizers for various different causes? One of the things we support is an idea of a universal basic income. Do you support that idea? And generally, how do you think we should support community organizers?
So, to support community organizers, the first thing that what all organizers or organizations need is funding, right? And that comes about when we're talking about, defunding the police. Those things bring about supporting those community organizations that are producing an outcome of for gun violence, or even if it's food desert, passing out food, or even if it's educating our youth, even if it's seniors, issues that is concerning seniors. So the first thing is funding. The second thing is passing legislation to help to prevent them from being out there, right? So every organization have a cause. Like, let's say if their cause is, gun violence. So if we're passing legislation around gun violence, guess what? That organization doesn't have a need to be out there. And so another thing we could do too is create a cross-movement organizations where every organization is working together for the betterment of the community. It's sort of kind of like the mutual aid aspect. We need federal funding for those things, but also we need to hold those elected officials accountable for putting forth these cross-movement organizations that is going to better the community. We also need to put them hold elected officials accountable as well for making sure that these issues are on the top of their priority.
Yeah, I do agree with you on a lot of that ability to work across these various different organizations. That's one of the things that we hope to do as the People's Basics, is help all these various organizations work better together. But I just wanted to follow up on one part of the question I asked before, which is, how do you feel about the idea of universal basic income in general?
I am, for one, totally agree with universal basic income. I do believe that universal basic income is going to be able to bring awareness to child poverty, right? But one thing for sure is that we cannot address child poverty without not addressing the issues that are concerning the parent, right? So if we're going to address child poverty, we got to hit the poverty that is the parent. So that is universal education. Universal health care. That is making sure that our unions or that our jobs are providing enough income where parents are able to pay their rent. Last week, I talked to a lady where she was telling me that, daycare is taking more than her rent. And so when we're talking about those things, we need to fix those parents' poverty too. And right now, I'm all for, working to fix the future generation. But right now, we need to work on the present generation because we have the time and the money to do so.
Yeah, and I agree. It's also an investment in our future when we invest in our parents too, because they're the ones taking care of the next generation.
Yes.
So Kirby, I have one more question for this first part of our interview. You mentioned various causes and the protest that you had attended for them, the Women's March, for criminal justice reform, et cetera. And I wanted to ask you your general kind of philosophy on protest and what is the most conducive form for how that's done, and if there are ways that it can go out of lines. Like there's obviously been a lot of talk recently about what's been happening in the US-Canada border and the trucker protest. I wanted to get your general philosophy of what is reasonable when it comes to protest and what is effective.
Well, I have to go with one of my most cherishable. I would have loved to have had him as a mentor, but he is most certainly an idol of mine. I remember when I was working in retail and I couldn't go see him when he was in Chicago, and that is John Lewis. And he said, when we see or hear things that are not just, that are not right, and, that is the time where we get into good trouble. And so I believe if the cause is to bring equity, inclusion into a district or to this nation, I'm all for a peaceful protest. That is what galvanized our civil rights movement and pushed us into this district where into this era where we're fighting, for voting rights and for women's rights. All of those protests during that time on their end was peaceful. And so I believe in peaceful protests. I believe in making sure that, I believe it's the fundamental portion of democracy. When you're able to hold your elected officials accountable, when you're able to speak truth to power, those are peaceful protests. And so with me, if I'm elected, one of the things that I do believe in this crowded field of all the people that is running in this district, one of the things that I believe that separates us all is being able to stand up to power, stand truth to power, making sure that, if you have the ear of the mayor, if you have the ear of the president, if you have the ear of the congressman, hey, this here is not right. What can we do to help you along the way to fix this? If you're just have the ear of these people, like the mayor, like the governor, like the president, and you're not speaking truth to power, then you're just as bad as someone that is not out there protesting.
Yeah, I think that's a definite good note is that if you do have this privilege of access, you have a higher responsibility to be using this for good causes that lead to a fairer society. One follow-up before we go into the break, though. I wanted to ask you, obviously, we can all agree of what causes are better than others in terms of protest, but do you think that there should be any degree of restriction? What kind of constitutes being peaceful? Like some people, let's take the example of what I mentioned beforehand, the whole US-Canada border thing. There's people who would say that just being obstructionist is nonviolent, that just parking themselves and making noise is not, assaulting anyone or committing violent crimes. Do you think that that falls into the definition of peaceful is like being able to make noise and obstruct? Does that kind of still fall into that definition in your mind, or any comments on that specific current event?
I do. I do believe that falls under the line of being peaceful. I believe that when you have a cause, and I hate to say this, even if when we're talking about people that are against vaccination, they have a cause, they have a voice too. And so if they're feeling like that their voice is not being heard, that's some grounds for protest, because at the end of the day, that's what Martin Luther King said. A riot is the voice of the unheard, right? And so when people are protesting, that's what they're trying to get. They're trying to get their message out. They're trying to get their voices heard. And so somewhere along the line, someone dropped the ball and didn't hear these people out. And so it's okay. I think it was Hillary Clinton said that you can't change minds, but you can change policies. And so that's the portion where we get to where we change policies so we can change minds. And so me personally, I do believe in whatever form of protest you feel, if it's not violent, if it's not causing a harm where someone is going to get killed, I believe that that is a form of protest.
Okay, well, that's a very fair perspective, Kirby. So let's take a quick break here before we come back in our second part, where we talk about Illinois' first district and the race that's going on there, as well as education policy, as we'd love to pick the public teacher's mind of what our teachers and our students need. So come join us in our second part of our interview, coming soon. Okay, we're back here with candidate Kirby Birgans in Illinois' first district. In the first part of our conversation, we really focused on community organizing and the central causes of his campaign that made him want to run for Congress. Now we want to focus in on his area of expertise as a teacher. We're going to be talking about education, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Illinois first district race. So Kirby, as a public school teacher, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what support do you need as a teacher in the classroom that you think that your government is not going their full, part of the bargain with you as a public educator? What do you think the federal government needs to be doing to support people like yourself?
I think the first thing that the government can do for me is create an atmosphere where my voice can be heard, where teachers' voices can be heard. We see a lot of policies being implemented around education, and teachers are not at the table when these policies are being implemented. And so the first thing, if I'm elected, I do want to create a committee where it would be nothing but teachers and principals, where we can all address those issues, where our federal government can help us. One of the things that I see as a teacher is most certainly the lack of funding, where your district, where you can determine how great your zip code. And so someone who stays in the zip code of 60649 or 60616 may not receive a better education than someone in the uphill of this district. And so we want to make sure that we're creating not just quality education, but equal access to resources, because that is what we see as a teacher, where you have some teachers, they have books and they have resources and all of these other tools that is needed to create an inclusive and a robust lesson for your student, where other teachers have to go through the internet and make illegal copies and sue that other end to make ends meet. And so one thing that we most certainly need is to make sure that schools are fully funded. Public schools need to be fully funded. I think that would stop this debate where charter schools and public schools, and if we're fully funding public schools. And so as a teacher, that would be the first thing that I will advocate for, fully funding our schools. And secondly, when we fully fund those schools, we will create resources for our students that will make sure that they're able to compete in a competitive global economy. When we're looking at, even in Chicago, I had to take you off this subject, but in Chicago, right, we see and we hear in the news often about how high our crime rate is and how high, how violent Chicago is. But I say this here, if we truly want to bring crime rate down, the first thing we can do is tackle our education system. That's the first thing. When I'm looking at statistics from the National Adult Literacy that is stating that 70% of inmates in jail are not reading on a fourth grade level, that means that we have failed a cohort, more than a cohort of adults now. And so one of the reasons why I'm running is that we won't fail another cohort. We can keep a slogan all day long saying no child left behind, but until we actually put meaning to it, we will be failing a generation of kids every year. And what we have to understand is that those kids become adults and they become parents. And so if we want to pursue education for a long time, our kids' education would be the best way to go.
Yeah, I think your point there at the end about how literacy is a big failing point in our education system today really resonates with me. I wanted to clarify, when you talk about funding, which can get all of these different programs that we want to address that kind of focus on quality of our public education system. Mm-hmm. What do you think is that reasonable level that you're looking for from the federal level? And do you have any numbers behind you of what the current level of funding that places like the 1st District of Illinois are getting in terms of funding from the federal government?
So what I do know is this here, that our federal government spends 3% of the federal budget on education. That's 3%. Now, let's look at our military budget, where it's an obscene number. And so we see where this nation morals lies, in wars and supporting our police budget or our military budget versus our education budget. When we're looking at, numbers, or when we're looking at when Illinois received the what's the money? The FAIRS Act. Not the FAIRS Act, the CARES Act. We're looking at that money. Yeah. We're seeing that we had issues far along, before we received the CARES Act funding. So here it is that money is just going to go to subsidies that we already have issues with. It's not going to even tackle the surface of our education numbers. And even now we're looking at the not the Individual Disability Act. It states that our federal government is supposed to give us 15% of that. I'm going to look at the numbers from 2017, I think it was. We didn't even receive 10% of that. So now we have all of these kids that is getting this funding under Title I, but that's trickling down to every school. So when I'm looking at numbers pertaining to the federal budget, coming to the 1st Congressional District, I would not really want to strictly hold those numbers to be true, because of the fact that when we're looking at, where that money would be allocated to, is it going to salary? Is it going to school embetterment for far as our fixing up environmental issues in schools? Is it going to better the schools as far as better textbooks, better equipment, or is this money just going to a pot of where all schools in Illinois is going to be pulling out from? If that is so, then we're doomed, because then we're still leaving behind those schools that are still struggling. Me personally, I believe we should tackle those schools that are struggling first and give them what they need so we can better those schools and then work our way down.
Yeah, I can understand that. You want to actually make sure that this money is being used properly before we start saying, okay, it's a specific amount that's been allocated, rather than how it's actually reaching the end users, which are these schools in need. I love this topic that you bring up with just education funding, because it's a personal passion of mine. I can't speak for Illinois' 1st District, but I can say nationwide, we have roughly 10% of the funding that goes to public primary schools comes from the federal government. Roughly 90% comes from either the state or the local level. And so that kind of brings all those inequalities you were talking about before of how the zip code plays in, because most of the local taxes are being funded by property taxes. And so poor areas are not getting the needed funding they need. Roughly right now, it's like $1,500 on average is being provided from the federal government per student. So I wanted to ask you, do you think we should have just a set standard that the federal government provides every school district? What does that involve? Is it just raising the amount that Title I provides? Like, how do you think as a congressman you can help bring more funding?
So I'm going to take a dab at this. I researched one of Representative Jamal Baldwin's Green New Deal for public schools. And so when I look at that, and when I look at how this bill can help the schools in my district, I'm blown away, and I would be a strong advocate for this particular Green New Deal for public schools. I'm just going to read off just a little bit of what that bill consists of. It is fighting to increase. Well, it says $3 billion into opening more neighborhood schools within the first congressional district, an investment of $3 billion to open more schools to reduce class sizes will allow a whole child approach, more support for our children, like counseling, health, and nutrients needed, and parent and community engagement. When it's talking about aiming to invest 1.3 million into public schools and to school infrastructure, hiring and training additional educators, 2.5 billion in resource block grants that will fund staffing and expand social services programs, and a curriculum developed at a higher need schools. This is exactly what the schools in the first congressional district need. And we need a robust plan on how to tackle this and get this into the Senate.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you there on the components of that bill. I had one more education question for you. Obviously, one of the big topics that's been plaguing national debates in 2021 has been this idea of critical race theory that's been playing out, as well as school choice. Do you have anything that you wanted to comment on the notion of school choice and how curriculums are, formed from these school boards, and which inputs should be incorporated from teachers to parents? Do you have any general thoughts that you wanted to share on those topics?
So first things first, I find it I just saw an article that was stating how I think it was 148 or 48%. I put it on my Twitter. 48% of teachers are leaving the profession. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why. When we're looking at stuff like critical race theory, if I am as a Black African American teacher, how is it that my Blackness is not able to be taught, to other students? We all say representation matters. And so when we're talking about Black history, when we're talking about, LGBTQ history, we're talking about American history. We cannot talk about, Black history and American LGBT history, or even, we're talking about the Holocaust. We're talking about all of those things that may be uncomfortable for some. That is American history. So what? We're going to have a whole generation of kids that don't know the history because of the fact that some people feel uncomfortable when we're talking about these things. It's okay to feel uncomfortable when you're talking about it. That means that it's resonating with you. That's what that means. And so when you feel uncomfortable, it's not for you to say, oh, I don't want to hear it. It should be say, what can we do to fix it? What can we do, or what can I do as a white person, a white male, or as a white female, to fix the issues that abides in the fabric of America, which is racism. And so, I always tell people, racist people talking, it is underlying undertones that keep these policies alive. And so if we want to fix racism, I tell people Ayanna is not going to be able to do it. You got to look in the man in the mirror that's going to be able to do this. It's because one way you could do this is just by voting. Just by voting and looking at people policies that are aligned to fixing this. You can vote off a person. Oh, I like him, or I think that he's cute, or I saw someone say, oh, well, he looks like a congressperson. And when we say those things, we're pushing that agenda that, oh, anyone that fits the bill can be an alderman, or anyone that looks like it can be a congressman. What about their policies? What are they saying that is going to help bring upper mobility and change the life expectancy of the people in this district? And so when I talk to people, that is what I help them to realize. If we want to change policies, we have to change officials is by voting, and voting for those people that have those particular policies in mind and have you in heart. Like, one of the things that I say is be first. Be first. This is the first district. We should be putting you first. And so if their policies are not aligned with putting you first, then guess what? They're not Congress ready. And so that's the reason why I'm running, because I believe that this district is in need of someone putting them first.
Well, I wholly share that sentiment. I wish more people would actually look at policies instead of rattling off all those superficial reasons that you gave me. But I hope that we can provide a little bit more of a platform where we get to focus on these policies and have that focus be known that it's all about the policies at the end of the day that's going to transform people's lives. But Kirby, I have one more final question before we wrap up today's program, and that's talking a little bit about the race in Illinois first. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, it's a crowded field, and how you are going about how much time do you have left? It's like a couple months left in the primary,
yes,
right, for Illinois?
June 28th.
June 28th. What is your plan? What are the types of people that you are trying to reach out to? And how are you trying to use the resources that contributors who like your campaign, how are you trying to use those resources to get yourself across the finish line?
So one thing that we're doing to make sure that our voices are heard within this district and separating ourselves in this race is, one, letting people know that our race is a human rights campaign. We deal with human rights issues, from climate change to saying that human rights, housing is a human right, to saying that immigrants are welcome here, to saying that education is the key to political and economic empowerment. And so with those things, we are telling those people that we have your back. Not just someone that just came out of nowhere. I was born, raised, and educated in this community. I know this community. I have my footprints in this community. My family has been born, raised, and educated in this community. I live in this community. I teach in this community. And so I have a sense of wellness for this community. I tell myself I'm the son of the first district. Like I said in the beginning, my life, it haven't been fair for me, but I do believe that our government should be. And I believe that right now, when I first jumped in this race, I was ready to, stand next to Representative Bobby Rush and debate him. Many of the people that jumped in this race jumped in right after he announced, which I find, I'm going to be honest, and I may get some slack for this, is a lack of courage, because of the fact that when we see the first congressional district, Bobby Rush been in office for 30 plus years. And when we look at the first congressional district, it has been blighted with gun violence. We're losing our babies far too soon. Our schools are stressed. We have a high unemployment rate. We have a low one district of the one part of the district have a higher life expectancy than the other one. When we're looking at the amount of equity that comes in here, economic wealth, all of those things, some of these people that, especially the elected officials, they should have been challenged him. So I find it a little bit cowardly to jump in a race after the person announced that they were not going to seek re-election. That makes me think that you saw the issue, or you cannot really speak on the issues, because if you can't speak on the issues while he was standing here, you shouldn't be able to speak on the issues when he's apart. And when I look at this district, I jumped in it because of the fact that I saw these things. And so that's what we tell the voters, and stand up as we spoke, truth to power. If I was going to be debating Bobby Rush, I was going to be able to tell him, hey, for 30 years, this district has been blighted, and so we need change. And you have not came up with concrete solutions. We have an infrastructure that is crumbling. And, and when it comes down to your absence in Washington, that states that we had no person at the table. And what I come from, if you're not at the table, guess what? You're on the menu. And so when we're looking at policies, and when we're saying, oh, this policy is not good and that policy, a lot of these issues have been here long before 30 years, long before 10 years, long before 15 years, and none of these people said anything. And so that's one of the things that we're talking to voters about. Another thing, we're bringing up new issues that is concerning the district. When we're talking about health, even now we're looking at a policy where we want to go and ask the insurance companies that they need to lower the age for getting the colonoscopy. When we look at our Black Panther, he passed away from colon cancer. And if myself go to my doctor and ask for a colonoscopy, I'm going to have to pay for that because my insurance say, oh, you're not at that age where you should be getting that. And so we want to lower that age to help bring, as we said, upper mobility and change the life expectancy in the people in this district. A lot of the candidates that are on the ballot are one-issue candidates, or talking about issues that are not in the wheelhouse of a congressperson. So if you don't know the qualifications, if you don't know what a congressperson should do, most certainly you should not be leading this district. And so I understand that it's an uphill battle when it's 85,000 candidates on the ballot. But I do believe that out of that 85,000, one of us is going to remain victorious. And I'm hoping that it's me. And so we can truly bring equity into this district that has been missing it for so long. This district, and when we go out to galvanize for signatures, we see it where people are not just unwilling to sign my petition, but not in a lot of people petition. I don't participate in elections, and I don't vote. And that is because those people have not been heard. And so when they see a government, that is telling people, oh, well, you can't get college, free college, but here it is, you're sticking on millions and billions, and so you're able to send your kids to where some people have to struggle for the neighborhood schools because they don't have the money to go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it's important that people do get a fair shot from their government, and they have representatives who can focus on issues big and small, from human rights to trying to make sure that insurers cover procedures that they are not currently saying the right age range. So I'm wishing you well in that race, Kirby. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the universal people before we end today's program?
I just want to first thank you guys for listening to this discussion. Another thing I want you to do is, if you can, please visit our website at www.kirby2022.org. Learn a little more about me. Also, I am a science teacher. Like I said, I was born, raised, and educated in this community. I know the issues concerning this community. I am a fierce advocate for the people in this community. I will come up with concrete solutions and innovative policies that will bring upper mobility into this community. I am a God-fearing man. I love children. I love our climate, and most certainly, I'm a married, same-sex married man. So I am an LGBTQ fighter. I fight for those policies because those policies are human rights policies as well. And also, just make sure that we are listening to policies before we go to the ballot box.
I think that's a great message. I hope more people focus on the policies, and we hope we can bring that message. It's been a pleasure meeting you, Kirby. Best of luck out there.
You. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So that was Kirby Birgans. This has been another episode of the People's Platform, where we're going to be interviewing people like yourselves and other advocates, as well as we want to bring you the candidates who are running on these universal basic issues. So if you want to go find more about Kirby, go check in the description section down below. We're going to include that link that he mentioned to his website in that description section as well. While you're there, you're going to also find our links to our program here. So if you want to support the People's Basics in building a home for the universal basics, please click that link, become a member, and support the People's Basics. Also, if you're still watching this video at this point, you probably like this video. So please leave that like and make sure that you're subscribed so that you see new videos in the future. So that's going to do it for us here at the People's Basics. Until next time, stay active, universal people.